The echo of the gavel cracked through the silent courtroom as if the sound itself carried judgment beyond words. Michael sat frozen, his hands trembling, while his breath caught in his chest, the verdict hammering him harder than the judge's strike. Beside him, Sarah whispered, "This isn't justice, this is betrayal," her voice thin yet sharp, a dagger cutting into the thick air. Reporters scribbled furiously, their pens scratching like vultures circling for scraps of truth. The prosecutor leaned back with a smug grin, his polished shoes tapping lightly under the desk, as though the verdict was inevitable. A single light flickered above, casting long shadows that danced over the marble floor, distorting the faces of men who hid secrets behind confident masks. Outside, thunder rolled low in the distance, as if nature itself protested the corruption inside these walls. In the back row, Emily clutched her notebook tighter, every word she wrote becoming a silent plea for the truth. Outside the courtroom, Michael walked slowly down the marble steps, his body heavy as if each step dragged him deeper into despair. Sarah kept pace beside him, her voice soft yet firm as she said, "We can't give up, not when the truth still breathes." Cameras flashed wildly, and reporters' questions cut through the damp night air, but he turned his face away, avoiding their hunger. Emily trailed at a distance, scribbling into her notebook, her restless energy burning through her young eyes. The storm outside mirrored the chaos inside his chest, every rumble of thunder echoing the injustice he carried. Sarah reached out, brushing her hand against his arm, a gesture of comfort that held both warmth and weight, a promise layered with something unspoken. Michael looked up at the courthouse one last time, the stone building looming like a fortress designed to crush those who dared to question its walls. The press conference room buzzed with tension, microphones lined like weapons on the table, before Michael and Sarah.d. A reporter asked, "Do you believe the court has failed you?" Michael paused, eyes lowering as though he carried the weight of every voice silenced by corruption. Sarah answered, "This isn't only about him, this is about a system that punishes truth." The crowd erupted in murmurs, cameras flashing, pens scratching. Emily lingered at the doorway, her notebook open, sketching faces instead of words, her gaze darting from Michael to Sarah as though she already knew what others refused to see. The room's air grew thick, every light bulb humming as if straining under the weight of secrets. Michael clenched his jaw, the anger inside him carefully caged, his silence speaking louder than any answer. Michael sat in the dim kitchen of his small apartment, staring at a cup of untouched coffee growing cold in front of him. Sarah stood at the counter, her hands moving nervously, arranging and rearranging items with no purpose. "They think silence will bury us," she said, her voice sharp but trembling underneath. Michael pressed his palms to his face, whispering, "Every road I take leads back to the same wall." The rain tapped steadily against the window, soft but relentless, a rhythm of persistence echoing his turmoil. On the table, an old envelope sat sealed, untouched for years, edges yellowing with time, its presence heavier than the air in the room. Sarah's eyes flicked toward it, but she said nothing, her silence louder than her words. Emily wandered alone through the darkened courthouse halls long after everyone had left, her sneakers squeaking faintly on polished floors. Her pen tapped against her notebook as she muttered to herself, "They don't see what's in front of them." She pressed her hand against the cold stone wall, feeling its weight as if it held memories no one else could touch. A photo frame tilted slightly on the wall caught her attention, the faces inside blurred by the dim light. She sketched them quickly, lines sharp, expression fierce, as though her pencil could capture truths others wanted buried. The silence was thick, interrupted only by distant echoes of dripping water. She shut her notebook, eyes narrowing, whispering, "This isn't over." Michael sat alone on the edge of his bed, the unopened envelope lying untouched on the nightstand, its weight pressing against him like an invisible hand. His eyes traced the cracks in the ceiling as Sarah entered quietly, her voice soft but steady, saying, "This fight isn't done, not while you're still breathing." He shook his head, muttering, "Every time I stand up, they push harder." Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder, her calm presence wrapping him like a blanket. yet behind her comfort flickered an unease she never allowed him to see. Outside, the faint glow of city lights spilled through half-drawn blinds, streaking shadows across the room like prison bars. Michael's breath slowed, but his hands remained restless, fingers tapping against his knee as though trapped in a rhythm of dread. The unopened envelope seemed to watch them both, daring him to break its seal. In the cafe's quiet corner, Sarah leaned forward across the small table, her fingers curling around a steaming mug as though holding warmth she couldn't find anywhere else. "You have to keep faith, Michael," she said, her tone soothing, her eyes shining with a conviction that felt both real and rehearsed. Michael stared into his untouched coffee, whispering, "Faith won't save us from their power." Around them, customers murmured in low voices, the hum of conversation weaving like a veil over their words. The rain outside blurred the window, distorting neon lights into streaks of color bleeding across glass. Sarah reached out, brushing his hand lightly, her touch soft but weighted, a gesture promising more than comfort. Michael's gaze finally lifted, but suspicion flickered beneath his exhaustion as he studied her face, searching for truths behind her calm. Late at night, Michael sat at the same kitchen table, coffee still untouched, his eyes fixed on the envelope, while Sarah lingered in the doorway, her shadow stretched long across the floor. "Why do you keep it sealed?" she asked gently, though her gaze lingered as if she already knew. Michael's lips tightened as he muttered, "Because opening it means facing everything I've run from." The steady tick of the wall clock filled the silence, each second pressing heavier on his chest. Sarah turned away, rearranging cups with unnecessary precision, her movements betraying a restless unease she tried to hide. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the window streaked with faint trails that shimmered in the dim light. Michael reached for the envelope, his hand hovering before pulling back, fear and longing colliding in his eyes. Emily walked the empty school corridor, her notebook clutched tightly to her chest, her restless energy carrying her forward. She paused at a bulletin board, eyes darting over announcements, and smiling faces frozen in photographs. Her pencil scratched across the paper as she muttered, "They think their truths are hidden, but walls always whisper." The fluorescent light above buzzed, flickering briefly, casting shadows that seemed to stretch toward her. She sketched quickly, her sharp strokes capturing not what she saw, but what she sensed beneath the surface. A teacher passed at the far end, their footsteps echoing, but Emily ducked into shadow, clutching her notebook tighter, lips curled into a faint smirk. For her, truth was not just uncovered, it was stolen back from those who thought they owned it. Michael returned to the courthouse steps at dawn, the building looming against a pale sky washed in gray. He stood with his hands in his pockets, his shoulders slumped, yet his eyes sharp, as though waiting for an answer that never came. Sarah appeared beside him, her voice soft but edged, "You'll destroy yourself if you keep fighting alone." He turned to her, the silence stretching like a chasm between them before he said, "Better to fall fighting than live as their puppet." The early morning wind swept across the marble, carrying the faint smell of rain. Emily lingered at the base of the steps, notebook open, sketching them both with quick strokes, capturing the weight. Neither of them spoke aloud. The courthouse doors remained shut, silent witnesses to a battle already raging within its walls. Michael sat in a dim archive room, files stacked high around him, the dust in the air glowing under a single swaying bulb. He flipped open a folder, his eyes narrowing as he whispered, "This evidence was buried." Pages showed signatures that didn't match, timestamps that contradicted sworn testimony, and documents that vanished from official records. Sarah leaned over his shoulder, her tone hushed but urgent. "If this gets out, they'll silence us before we can speak." Michael clenched his jaw, muttering, "Then we make sure it gets out faster." The tension pressed against them both as the sound of footsteps echoed faintly in the hall, distant yet approaching. Sarah's hand rested on the back of his chair, steadying her own nerves, while Michael tucked the file beneath his arm, ready to run if discovery came too soon. Emily slipped into Michael's apartment unannounced, her notebook clutched tight, eyes sharp with restless urgency. "You're missing what's right in front of you," she said, tossing sketches of shadowed figures across the table. Michael stared at the drawings, lines etched with a clarity that revealed connections he hadn't seen. Sarah's voice cut in sharply. "She shouldn't be here, it's too dangerous." Emily smirked, replying, "Danger doesn't care if I'm here or not." The room felt smaller as the three of them stared at the papers, their breaths overlapping in uneven rhythm. Michael tapped a finger against one sketch, whispering, "If this is true, the corruption runs deeper than we feared." Emily leaned closer, eyes gleaming. "It's true. And you're not ready for what comes next." David arrived quietly, his steady presence filling the room with a calm that masked something heavier beneath. He set a bag of food on the table, saying lightly, "You'll think clearer if you eat." Michael nodded but did not reach for it, his focus locked on the scattered evidence. Sarah eyed David, her voice carrying subtle weight. "You always know when to show up." He smiled faintly, though his eyes avoided hers, as though hiding an old decision he wished to forget. Emily leaned back, tapping her pencil, muttering, "Too many pieces, not enough trust." The silence grew heavy, layered with truths unspoken, until Michael said, "We need to move before this disappears again." David simply replied, "Then let's move fast," his tone loyal but edged with something unresolved. In the courthouse basement, Michael found an empty shelf where files should have been, his breath catching in his throat. He muttered, "They're gone, every single one." Sarah gripped his arm tightly, whispering, "They're always one step ahead." Emily paced in the background, her eyes darting across the room, muttering, "Walls remember even when people lie." Michael slammed his fist against the metal frame, the echo carrying down the empty corridor like a warning. David crouched near the shelf, running his hand over faint dust outlines, saying softly, "Someone moved these recently." This wasn't neglect. The air smelled of mold and damp stone, pressing a heaviness around them, as if the courthouse itself resisted their search for truth. Back at the apartment, Michael spread the remaining documents across the table, his frustration boiling beneath the surface. "Every piece we find they take two away," he said through clenched teeth. Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder, replying, "Then we hold tighter to what's left." Emily sketched symbols in the margin of her notebook, muttering, "Truth is stubborn. It finds a way out." David stood near the window, staring at the rain-slicked street below, his voice low. "If we push too fast, they'll come for us before we're ready." Michael slammed a folder shut, eyes burning. "They already have." The silence that followed carried the weight of choices none of them were ready to make, yet knew were coming. Michael sat across from a weary witness in a cramped motel room, the faded curtains drawn tight against the night. The man's voice trembled as he admitted, "I signed a statement I never read." Michael leaned closer, whispering, "They forced you." The witness nodded, his hands shaking, as he added, "They told me my family would suffer if I didn't." Sarah stood against the wall, arms folded, her eyes sharp with recognition, the truth pressing like glass shards between them. Emily scribbled furiously in her notebook, every word feeding her restless energy. Michael's pulse quickened as he said, "Your testimony changes everything." The witness looked away, fear carved into his face, muttering, "If they know I spoke, I won't live to see another day." The silence that followed pressed heavy, each breath echoing the weight of betrayal. Emily paced outside the motel, her sneakers splashing in shallow puddles as she muttered to herself, "They hide everything in plain sight." Michael stepped out into the damp night air, his voice low as he said, "You saw connections I couldn't." Emily smirked, holding up her notebook, sketches forming a map of faces and threads binding them together. Sarah joined them, pulling her coat tighter, warning, "This isn't a game, one mistake could cost us all." Emily looked at her sharply, retorting, "Maybe you've made mistakes already." Michael cut in, his tone heavy, "What matters is what we do next." The rain fell steadily, streaking neon reflections across the pavement, each drop echoing the storm gathering within them. David arrived late, his footsteps heavy as he entered the apartment where the others waited. He placed a folder on the table, saying evenly, "I had to trade something to get this." Michael's eyes narrowed, suspicion flashing as he asked, "What did you give up?" David avoided his gaze, muttering, "Just an old favor, nothing more." Sarah's jaw tightened, her voice cutting like steel. "Favors don't vanish, they return with claws." Emily leaned back, eyes darting between them, whispering, "Someone here isn't telling the whole truth." The room fell silent, the folder on the table like a bomb waiting to be opened. Michael finally reached for it, his hand shaking as if he already knew what he would find. The courtroom doors opened to reveal Catherine, known to many as untouchable, her every step deliberate and graceful. She paused before speaking, her voice calm yet commanding. "You're meddling in matters you can't control." Michael straightened, forcing his voice steady as he replied, "The truth doesn't belong to you." Sarah's breath caught, her eyes fixed on Catherine with a mixture of awe and dread. Emily's pencil moved swiftly, sketching the poised figure before her, muttering, "Even shadows leave outline." David shifted uncomfortably, his gaze locked on Catherine as though her presence awakened old debts he wished forgotten. The air seemed to tighten around them, her calm composure suffocating, each word she spoke shaping the silence into iron chains. In the quiet of the night, Michael replayed Catherine's words in his mind, each syllable coiled like a threat that lingered long after she was gone. He whispered to himself, "She's the wall we have to break." Sarah sat across from him, her voice low and trembling, "But breaking her may destroy us." Emily lay sprawled on the couch, flipping through her sketches, muttering, "Walls crack from the inside first." David stood near the window, the city lights reflecting in his eyes, silent, as if weighed by secrets too heavy to confess. Michael closed his fist around the sealed envelope, his breath ragged, the choice before him pressing harder with each passing moment. The night stretched long, every sound in the city a reminder that time was slipping away, and their enemies moved faster than truth could travel. The courthouse was filled with tense silence as Michael stood before the bench, his voice steady but heavy. "This system thrives on silence, and I refuse to be silent." Sarah's hand tightened around her pen, her notes trembling as she glanced at him, pride and fear blending in her eyes. David sat in the gallery, his jaw clenched, hands gripping the armrests, his loyalty cracking under the weight of old choices. Emily sketched from the back row, her strokes sharp, each line a weapon capturing what others ignored. Catherine watched from the front, her face calm, her eyes fixed like a blade waiting to cut. Michael's words rang louder as he said, "Truth will outlast the lies you build." The gavel hovered, its strike ready to seal more than just a verdict. Later, in a private chamber, Michael confronted Catherine, his voice raw. "You've built a kingdom of lies." She replied smoothly, "And you're just another voice lost in its walls." Sarah stood behind him, torn between anger and fear, whispering, "She holds more than power, she holds memory." Catherine's eyes sharpened as she leaned closer, saying softly, "You think truth sets you free, but truth binds you tighter." Michael's hands trembled, but his words cut back, "Truth may break me, but it will destroy you." The air grew thick with tension, every breath echoing like a countdown. Emily peeked through the crack in the door, capturing the moment in her notebook, her strokes fast, as though she knew the scene itself was a weapon. Back in the apartment, Michael's voice cracked as he admitted, "I don't know how much more I can carry." Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder, whispering, "You're not carrying it alone." Emily sat cross-legged on the floor, her notebook spread wide, muttering, "The cracks are showing, the walls are weaker." David leaned against the counter, his voice low. "Sometimes survival means sacrifice, and I've done it before." Michael's head snapped toward him, eyes burning. "What did you give away?" David looked away, silence heavier than any confession. Sarah's breath quickened, as if she already knew the answer he wouldn't speak. The envelope still sat on the table, its seal unbroken, daring him to choose the moment that would shatter everything. The trial climaxed in chaos as Michael presented evidence torn from the shadows, his voice echoing. This proof was hidden to protect the guilty. The gallery erupted in shouts, reporters scrambling, cameras flashing like lightning. Sarah's hands shook as she passed documents forward, her face pale but resolute. Catherine's composure cracked slightly, her lips tightening as she whispered to her aide. David remained frozen, sweat beading on his forehead, his loyalties split like glass. Emily stood suddenly, her notebook raised, shouting, "Look at the faces, they don't match their lies." The judge slammed the gavel, demanding silence, but the truth already spilled into the room, unstoppable, wild, and uncontainable. After the verdict, the courthouse hall was filled with chaos, but Michael stood still, his chest heaving, his eyes fixed on the sealed envelope still in his hand. Sarah whispered, "Open it now. End this." His fingers traced the edges, but hesitation froze him. Emily stepped closer, her voice fierce. "The truth belongs to more than you." David lingered in the shadows, his face unreadable, torn between relief and regret. Catherine passed silently down the corridor, her eyes meeting Michael's briefly, her calm a chilling reminder that the war wasn't over. Michael closed his fist around the envelope, whispering, "The truth will wait, but it won't die." The hall echoed with footsteps fading into uncertainty, the battle won, but the war unresolved. The city awoke to headlines screaming of corruption exposed, yet Michael felt no triumph as he walked through the quiet street at dawn. Sarah walked beside him whispering, "You've broken their mask, but the scars remain." His hands shook as he muttered, "Truth feels hollow when justice bends." Emily trailed a few steps back, scribbling in her notebook, her eyes sharp as she said, "Scars mean survival, not surrender." Michael glanced at her, seeing resilience beyond her years, though his own strength faltered. The street smelled of rain, and every passing car felt like a shadow watching too closely. He knew the battle wasn't over, only paused. The envelope in his pocket pressed like a stone, reminding him that the deepest truth still waited to cut open the world. Inside the apartment, Sarah finally confessed, her voice trembling, "I thought I was protecting you, but I was only protecting myself." Michael stared at her, his chest tight, whispering, "You knew more than you said." Her hands twisted together as she admitted, "I made compromises, and now we pay for them." Emily slammed her notebook shut, saying, "Betrayal never hides forever." David entered quietly, his expression grim as he muttered, "Secrets rot everything they touch." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she reached for Michael's hand, but he pulled away, his silence sharper than any rejection. The weight of her words sank like lead into the room, the walls themselves absorbing the confession. The envelope lay untouched on the table, its silent presence mocking every broken promise between them. Emily stormed into the alley behind the courthouse, her voice rising, "I won't be silent like the rest of you." Michael caught up, pleading, "You don't understand the danger." She turned on him, eyes burning. "Danger already lives inside us." Sarah appeared, her voice breaking, "We are losing ourselves." David lingered at the edge, his silence a heavy reminder of choices he still hid. Emily raised her notebook high, shouting, "If you want, show them the truth, I will." Michael grabbed her wrist gently, his voice hoarse, "You're brave, but they'll destroy you." She pulled free, whispering, "Maybe destruction is the only way to make them see." The rain returned, falling hard, soaking them as the alley filled with echoes of defiance and despair. Catherine sat in her immaculate office, her movements calm as she wiped invisible dust from the polished desk. Her voice carried softly but firmly, "You forced me to show my hand sooner than I planned." Michael stood across from her, jaw set, saying, "Your walls are cracking." She tilted her head, eyes piercing. "Walls are meant to contain, not collapse." Sarah shifted uneasily, muttering, "Containment never lasts forever." David stood stiff, refusing to meet Catherine's gaze, his silence betraying an old connection. Emily leaned against the doorframe, smirking, "Even queens fall when the board changes." Catherine's lips curved into a cold smile as she whispered, "But pawns rarely survive the game." The room's stillness pressed heavier than shouts, every word a weapon laid bare. That night, Michael sat alone with the envelope in his hand, its edges worn from years of waiting. Sarah watched from across the room, whispering, "Once it's open, nothing can be undone." Emily leaned forward, urging, "It's not about you anymore. It's about everyone." David stayed silent, but his shadow stretched long on the wall, his guilt filling the silence. Michael's breath shuddered as he whispered, "This letter holds the reason I survived when others didn't." His hands trembled, tearing at the seal, but he stopped, fear clutching his chest. The city outside roared with distant sirens, as though echoing his turmoil. He lowered it again, knowing the choice would define them all. The envelope remained closed, a silent weapon waiting for its moment to strike. Michael walked through the quiet cemetery at dusk, the weight of the unopened envelope pressing against his chest like a stone. He paused before a weathered grave, whispering, "You should have been here, not me." Sarah stood a short distance behind, her coat pulled tight, her voice carrying softly, "The living never stop bargaining with ghosts." Emily traced the carved letters with her fingers, muttering, "Names vanish, but memories carve themselves deeper." David lingered at the gate, silent, his shadow stretched by the dying sun. Michael's hands trembled as he rested them on the cold stone, his breath uneven. The silence was broken only by the rustle of leaves, every sound magnifying the hollowness within him. The graveyard seemed to hold answers he feared to hear. Later, Michael sat alone in the courthouse gallery, empty benches stretching endlessly under cold light. He whispered to himself, "This place remembers more lies than truths." Sarah entered quietly, sitting beside him saying, "But it also remembers every fight." Emily appeared in the doorway, her notebook clutched tight, her voice steady. "History doesn't erase, it hides." Michael turned toward her, seeing the fire in her eyes, and felt both fear and pride. David stood in the shadows at the back, his silence heavier than stone. Michael closed his eyes, letting the echoes of past trials press against him. The room felt alive with whispers of the condemned, and for a moment, he wondered if justice was ever real, or only an illusion crafted by power. The group gathered in Michael's apartment one final time, the table littered with scattered documents and coffee cups long gone cold. Michael's voice was hoarse as he said, "We fought, but did we win?" Sarah leaned forward, whispering, "Winning means surviving with truth intact." Emily raised her notebook, her eyes blazing. "Truth already lives outside us. It's too big to silence." David exhaled heavily, admitting, "But silence is easier for most, and that's why corruption thrives." Michael stared at the envelope still on the table, his voice low. "This decides if it all ends or begins again." The tension coiled tight in the small room, every glance carrying suspicion, loyalty, and fear. The walls seemed to lean closer, waiting for his choice. Catherine stood on the courthouse steps at night, her presence poised and commanding, reporters swarming around her. She smiled faintly as she declared, "The law bends, but it does not break." Her words slid like polished steel, shaping the narrative even as truth clawed beneath. Michael watched from the shadows, muttering, "She still controls the story." Sarah touched his arm gently, whispering, "Control lasts until cracks grow too wide." Emily snapped another sketch in her notebook, eyes burning as she said, "Even statues crumble when weathered long enough." David stood nearby, his face unreadable, as though weighing where loyalty would anchor him. Catherine's calm presence left the air heavier, reminding them all that power was not defeated, only challenged. In the dead of night, Michael stood by the window, the envelope finally torn open, its contents spread across the table. His eyes filled with grief, as he whispered, "This was the truth I was never meant to hold." Sarah stood silently behind him, her face pale, her hand covering her mouth as if holding back a cry. Emily leaned over the papers, her voice trembling yet fierce, "Now it belongs to the world." David remained near the doorway, shadows concealing most of his expression, but his silence screamed louder than words. Michael's breath shook as he whispered one last time, "Justice doesn't free us, it only changes the shape of our chains." The city lights glowed faintly through the window, cold and unyielding, as if bearing witness to the haunting truth unveiled.